Hey guys, you're listening to the Money Date Podcast, a podcast that my husband and I launched to help young couples get real about their money.
That's right. We'll ask our friends and a few strangers all the uncomfortable and awkward questions about how they handle their money.
All the gory details, and hopefully a few tips and tricks along the way that you can pick up and use in your own relationship.
All right. Welcome to our latest episode of The Money Date. I'm Delmar.
And I'm Aditi.
And we're joined today by our friends Taylen and Sarah. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
So we were just talking about how the two of you met, and Taylen, you said that you usually tell this story, and so wanted to give Sarah the chance to tell it from her perspective. It sounds like, Sarah, you might be the better storyteller anyway, so take us away.
I was living with one of my friends from high school who had a friend, Amanda. And Amanda's mom wanted to have a 50th birthday party where she went out dancing with all of Amanda's friends.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was super fun. So we went out to dinner, and then we went to Blondie's in the city. And I love to fucking dance. And I don't, am I not supposed to curse? I'm sorry.
Cursing is on the table. This is not a children's show, or not meant to be. We're getting you guys raw and unfiltered, so curse away.
Sorry, we had over that before, so I didn't know how to react. Carry on.
So I was doing my thing. I tend to sort of like get really into the groove and stop paying attention to most things. And that certainly happened that night. I have type 1 diabetes and my blood sugars were really low, so I ended up going home. That's all I remember of that evening. And it wasn't until later that I learned I actually met Taylen that night. The first time I remember meeting Taylen, he was dressed up like a woman for a Halloween party that we were having at my and Amanda's home.
Pumpkin carving.
Yeah, that's right. We were having a pumpkin carving party. And Taylen was dressed to the nines in a little like tube top and
Wait,
skirt.
so it wasn't a Halloween party. It was a pumpkin carving party, but Taylor just...
It was Halloween week. Yeah, it was like the day after Halloween, or it was.
No, it was.
Okay, it's right around. Yeah.
I remember meeting him. I also remember him touching my ass, which I was horrified about. But that is how we met, through friends, more or less.
At a dance party that you don't remember meeting him at, and him dressed as a woman. That's a hell of a story, guys.
Yeah, the dress of the woman was a separate night. I was dressed just regularly for the night that I remember, Sarah, because we were going out dancing. I had become friends with Amanda fairly recently, right before that, and she had invited me and another friend to come along. And I remember seeing Sarah on the dance floor and being very interested, because here was this woman who had not a care in the world, only cared about dancing, and it shows because she doesn't remember meeting me, even though I talked to her a few times.
A few times?
Yeah, I went up to her, tried dancing, talked to her a couple other times, talked to like a group of friends, because we had a lot of mutual friends at this point. Yeah. Huh. And then eventually weaseled my way through Amanda into getting an invite to a very exclusive pumpkin carving party. So, yeah.
Well, let's just say that changed your life, so hey.
That's incredible.
It did.
And, coincidentally, the first couple we had on the show also met each other on Halloween night, and they're now happily married as well. So
there's something about that night.
Yeah, go
Magic
figure.
in the air.
So that was how you met. How much after that did Sarah, you know that Taylen was the one for you?
It was a while. I tend to be pretty cautious, and Taylen also had kind of a reputation being kind of a whore bag.
Was that a reputation deserved, Taylen, or are we embellishing here?
It was like a fun year.
Keep in mind that we're going to send this podcast to your parents, Taylen.
Yeah.
That was a diplomatic or political answer. Very nice.
So yes and no, I guess. From what Sarah knew and from what my friends knew, yes.
Okay.
But yeah.
Yeah, so it was really, when I was done with my first year of grad school, so I think we were 4 years in, and we were living together. And yeah, Taylen just really stepped up. It was a really hard time for me, and Taylen, like, without me even really having to ask, just sort of stepped up to the plate and really took care of me. And at that point, I was like, okay.
So the two of you met on Halloween night, and looking forward, at what point did you start to talk about finances? At what point did you start to talk about money together?
That's a good question. I feel like for me, it's something that's kind of just on my mind, and so like it probably started. I don't have a specific answer, but it probably started with little things, picking up checks. One thing that I remember us discussing at one point. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe Sarah. I will pick up the tab when we go out to eat, and Sarah would pay for groceries.
Oh yeah.
So that was
pretty early.
Yeah, it was maybe a year in. We'd go out to eat because we're still in that dating phase. But we'd also eat at we'd eat over at Sarah's place, or even when we moved in together, it's still kind of a honeymoon phase where we'd do that. So that was maybe one of the first kind of bigger conversations we had about money as a couple.
How did that start to evolve as you guys moved in together and things started to heat up and get more serious?
To today, we still have our own separate kind of checking accounts. And I feel like we always just kind of had independent money, but we talked about it freely.
Mm-hmm.
We discussed if it was a household item that we're both going to benefit from. We discussed, but there were a handful of bigger purchases. So I remember Sarah had gotten some birthday money or maybe Christmas money or something like that and wanted to buy a mattress. And once that happened, I remember feeling pretty guilty at first about the fact that this was something that we were both sharing, and she paid for the whole thing. And then it was like, hey, well, I'll pay you for half. I can't right now, but I'll pay you back for half. And then Sarah kind of being like, no, this is something that I wanted. This is something that I got the money and I wanted to put it towards. So I feel like it's just kind of been conversations that just happen with us.
Yeah. Yeah, we can totally relate to that. I remember in the early days when we were living in New York and Delmer was a PhD student and I was working full time. It was a constant conversation of like one-off purchases of, hey, this is something that we wanted to get, and I could afford it because I had a full-time job and Delmar was a student, so it was just a very different dynamic. So totally understand that feeling. And when you guys got engaged and you got married, did any of that change? Did you start to formalize that stuff more, or did you just sort of ease into it?
We kind of eased into it. But I remember it, like, that was one of the big things, like when people ask, like, oh, does it feel different?
Yeah.
It's like, it's, it's weird. It shifted, like, how I at least thought about money. I don't, like, our money, it just really felt like, okay, so this is our pot.
Mm-hmm.
And just less, I don't know.
We don't nitpick a whole lot with, like, where, like, before when we were dating, before we got engaged, anything like that. I don't think we ever really nitpicked on, well, I paid for dinner the other week, so you should pay for this Target run. And I bought gifts for the niece and nephew, so you need, there was none of really that. It just, we each kind of picked up things here and there. And at least from my perspective, I feel like there's a pretty even split, even though it could have been way off, I feel like we did a good job of just kind of balancing out and never really having the big sit down conversation, but just kind of making sure that we were talking about stuff. If someone did buy a bunch of stuff and felt uneven, which didn't happen hardly ever, we'd talk about it, but it would never be a big thing. It would just be kind of a one-off comment. But I guess to get back to the question about formalizing, I guess that was the big thing, was just trying to think about money as our money instead of my money and Sarah's money.
Oh, yeah, and when he started paying my student loan, that was a weird moment for me.
Were you guys married then, or were you not married yet?
We were married.
Okay.
But it was just like, oh yeah, this is real.
Yeah. Yeah. It got real.
I look at it as, from my perspective at least, like putting money towards her loan was tackling a goal that we both have of, out of debt and being able to save for other things. So, because these are our things now. But yeah, it kind of formalized in my mind, but it didn't actually formalize as like any plan. We did have a conversation, but I sat down and made a spreadsheet of naturally. I love my spreadsheet. So yeah, when I guess not long after we got married, or maybe it was even right before, I'm not exactly sure, sat down and put together a spreadsheet of, okay, here's kind of all the things that we spend each month. Here's how much we each take in. Here's how much we have for this. If we want to put together an emergency fund, this is what we need to do. If we want to get out of debt, here's what we need to do. So there was that kind of I guess there was that formalization, but I had been doing kind of financial spreadsheets for myself already. So it just kind of was something I wanted to do. And Sarah was like, yeah, sure, I'll go along with it.
Did you have to adapt anything about what you were doing when you and Sarah started doing this together? Or did you just follow the same blueprint?
Mostly just follow the same blueprints. Because like I said, we have our own separate money.
I would say we did something pretty significantly different in that we talked to a financial advisor
I see.
for the first time right before we got married.
Yeah.
What questions did you guys have?
So my parents have they had a dowry, right? And Taylen and I made a decision that we didn't want to spend all that money. We wanted to keep it. And so we wanted to figure out what the best way to use that chunk of money was. Do we put it all towards the loan? Do we put some in savings and some towards the loan? Or what's the best strategy?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the main question. I know Taylen had some.
I'd racked up some debt as well, just credit card debt over the years.
Yep.
So it's just kind of asking him, what do we do? Do we go after our debt first? His first thing was create an emergency fund, set up a nice little safety net for yourself.
Yep.
And then attack the debt that you guys both have. So that was a big thing that kind of formalized it too, is we talked to someone just because we knew we had these X, Y, and Z things we had to do, but what was the order? What's the best way to do it? What's a good strategy? Stuff like that.
Had you tried other approaches before moving to a financial planner? Had you tried asking family or friends? And if so, what was it that they couldn't answer for you that a financial planner could?
Well, we asked, I guess we went to family, talked with, it was actually Sarah's dad, and he's the one who just suggested, it's the financial planner that he had been using. And so he said he would talk to him about setting up a meeting with us. And so Sarah's dad set us up with this guy.
Yeah, because he didn't have a clear answer for us.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have the equity to hire Andy, who was the financial planner we saw. He agreed to take us on as sort of a favor to my parents.
That's awesome. That's really helpful to have somebody that, who is, one, will give you advice in your best interest, and two, do it for free, even better. Honestly, listening to you guys, you sound pretty savvy about money. Like, about emergency funds and debt payoff and, savings and everything. How did you get this smart about money?
For me, my own dad. So he's always been pretty good. He's obviously pretty good on the just kind of like savings and figuring out where to spend, but also investment wise.
Mm-hmm.
He's done well there and been able to just pass along little tidbits here and there as he's gone along. I just kind of saw my parents. My parents are both pretty frugal, and so they did a good job. As a kid, it was annoying or it just kind of bothered me that I would have the off-brand of most things. But once I became an adult and having to start paying for things on my own, I was like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. And then I started to think back. I was like, oh, as kids, we got to go on a lot of trips together as a family. We got to do a lot of other big things. And my parents, realized, or we're just smart about money, and let's not spend it on, the name brand shoes. Instead, let's put it towards savings for something fun as a family. And that all clicked when I became, as most parental advice does, clicked when I became an adult. And so just kind of learned from them. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, always this sort of like, so, you saving up for retirement? You want to go to this retirement seminar? Because it's really important that you start that when you're young.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
That's her Olin voice.
Yeah. I don't know. My parents came from really different backgrounds, and so it was interesting watching them sort of navigate. My dad is, but my parents also, I was frustrated as a kid sometimes by the things that I couldn't buy and couldn't do, and, but yeah, walking away from that and seeing, one, sort of how they did it, because, I ended up reorganizing my dad's office, and so I went through all of his financial documents with him, and he has, like, records from the fucking 70s, so...
Not anymore.
Well, not anymore, because I got rid of them, but...
Isn't it a 7-year rule? You should keep records for 7 years, and then you can check it.
That's the rule, Oddity, but...
His rule was 70.
His rule was you never know. You never know. You're going to have to prove what you spent on a remodel project on a house you no longer own from a jillion years ago.
Sounds like my approach to most receipts. You never know, and it's Oddity's continuous frustration that I have receipts from like 2011 for a thing that I don't even own anymore. Yeah. That's another story. So if that's your past, sort of what forms the foundation of sort of financial understanding for the both of you, maybe let's move forward to today. How often do you talk about money?
So formal. If that's the past, like, you're such a funny person.
Well, that's me.
You know what I mean? Like, he's just like moves naturally into this radio person, and I'm like, who are you?
How often do you talk about money today? Like, when do these conversations come up?
Taylen thinks more about money than I do, I would say. But I like that he talks about, okay, so we need to think about we got to think about down payment, and we got to think about life insurance now. We're thinking about having a kid, and, yeah.
Taylen, would you describe yourself as a planner?
Yeah, that's one word for it. Yeah.
Why are you laughing, Sarah?
Because Taylen is like an absurd planner to an extent that makes me, like, if I had to do the sort of planning that Taylen does, I would blow my brains out.
It's kind of, I think it's from New Girl, where there's a line where it says if you'd rather plan a trip or go on a trip, she'd rather plan a trip. I'm not quite that bad, but I do enjoy planning trips, and just kind of anything in life, I guess.
Taylen, we should have planning parties. We should have planning parties together.
Sarah's more of the just kind of laid back, just take it easy.
It'll work out.
Yeah, Sarah, it sounds like you and me are very similar.
Well, hold on a second.
Yeah?
I like to plan our future, but I do not like to plan our present.
Yeah.
You like to plan our present.
Yeah. I suppose. I do tend to take a more of it'll figure itself out sort of approach with respect to the future, I guess.
Yeah, whereas with the present, I'm like, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's very interesting sort of balance.
One thing about me on that note, so I like to plan both present and future.
You've got it all covered. If you ever want to plan for anybody else and you feel like you've run out of things to plan for, you and I should have a conversation.
Sounds good. When things start to go off the rails, when my plans start to fall through, I do take a very, they'll all work out type attitude. I'll figure it. I trust myself to figure it out, but I do love to plan.
Yeah. And so it sounds like, Taylen, you're the one who brings up these conversations about money. Do you have sort of a set plan for when these conversations come up, or do they sort of surface?
Well, he definitely has a set plan.
Okay. How regularly do you plan to bring up conversations about money then?
Thinking about this podcast and in the weeks leading up to it, I used to have a more kind of formal, like, hey, we should talk about this, or we should talk about that. Like, hey, I'm going to go look at life insurance. You ready for me to ask you some questions or give me some feedback? But I feel like I've kind of done a bad job in the past few weeks of this, where got into a bad habit of bringing up money when it's about a purchase that's been made. And like Sarah's made a purchase and I'll get frustrated, and that's the worst time to bring up money, right? When emotions are on the line. I don't know if you felt it, Sarah, but I certainly have, and as I've like reflected on it, I've been like, oh, this has not been very good of me. And so we've had our more recent conversations about money has been along that line. It's been like, oh man, or even if I'm feeling guilty about spending so much money on travel or whatever it is right now, those are not the times to necessarily have the conversations. At least I don't think, and that's what they've been more recently. But they do tend to just kind of come up. There's no set schedule or set plan. They just kind of come up when they come up. And maybe it'll be because I'm planning to look at life insurance, or I'm planning to make some changes to my budgeting, or I just happen to be looking at my spreadsheets and something caught my attention and wanted to just talk with Sarah. So that's kind of how it comes up.
Looking back over the last few weeks, these conversations have tended to come up when you feel it sounds stressed about something, and you said that that's not always a good idea. Why is that?
I feel like it clouds your judgment and sets you up for a conversation not based on logic anymore. I feel like we, or at least Sarah, has a very calming presence for me for the most part, and so it usually goes okay. But I feel like it's not a great time to have those conversations because emotions can get in the way. If I'm frustrated at her for making a purchase or just getting rid of a bunch of our stuff with something that happened recently, that can be a bad time to talk about things like money.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think one of the tricks that we found that helps us is we have these like monthly conversations that we put into our calendar where we sit down and look at things. And what I find really helpful about that is, and we the podcast is named after that, the money date. But what we find really helpful about that is that we end up getting to look at everything holistically rather than talking about a one-off thing, whether it's good or bad, honestly. Because sometimes it's like, oh, I got a refund for $250 and you're like, woohoo. But when you sit down and look at your overall finances, you're like, oh crap, I need to use that towards this other thing that we've been trying to plan for or make happen.
Yeah.
Cool. So one other question for you guys. One of the things that I think is really interesting is we talked to a lot of couples about how they're making it work for them, how money is how they're hacking money together in a productive way. I'm actually really curious, when it comes to your finances, what frightens you the most?
Not having enough, not being able to achieve our goals, coming up short. Yeah.
Totally fair answer.
Yeah, letting Sarah down, I guess, so not having enough, things like that.
God.
I know, we're getting, yeah.
No, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think it sort of highlights the key difference between us, in that I think, I just don't...
You're not as worried.
I'm not as worried.
Yeah.
I guess, that's true. I do worry, like, because I do have a chronic illness, like if I end up with, terrible shit happening to me and I have complications or something, that I'll drain all the money from our family or something. I worry about that sometimes. Because I tried, my dad, of course, was really eager for me to get on the CalPERS, like long-term healthcare plan, and he get a pretty cheap rate at my age, and they denied me. So it like put this seed in my head that, I need to do that, and because if I don't, then I'm going to bankrupt my family. So
this is always one of my favorite questions because it speaks to some of the stuff, like we don't always think about money all the time, but when you tap into your fears, you start to understand like sometimes the drivers for some of the decisions you make about other stuff that you don't even realize it impacts.
Yeah.
I wanted to move on to our rapid fire section. The beginning of our conversation before we got on the call, Aditi and I asked the two of you 5 questions. And
I prefer to refer to it as the honeymoon game.
Okay. So get ready for...
Which one sounds more fun?
The honeymoon game.
Rapid fire or the honeymoon game?
Formerly known as the rapid fire section. Newly promoted to the honeymoon game.
Great. So the second section of sort of our conversation has to do with the honeymoon game questions we asked the two of you before we got on our call. And we'd like to turn to that now. And the first question, I'll start with you, Sarah. If Taylen won $1 million today, what do you think he'd do with the money?
Pay off my debt and put the rest in savings to buy a house. Probably invest some because he's more of a risk taker than me.
Taylen, how'd she do?
She pretty much nailed it. Yeah, that'd be pretty much what I'd do. I'd maybe set up a nice little travel fund as well.
Oh yeah, you do love that.
Okay, very cool.
That'd be like the one little thing I'd do for fun in there. Most of it would be very riskable. Get a nice savings account, make some investments. She pretty much nailed it.
Very cool.
Taylen, what would Sarah do with the money?
Buy some nice household items and a house to put it in.
Sarah, how well did he do?
I think I would.
That was mainly a nice way of saying, like, buy a house with it. Yeah.
Got it.
I kind of went on the track of just like what one thing instead of a few things.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But I definitely think she would put some into a save for retirement or save just in general, things like that.
Yeah, but it's definitely, I think, like, you know, paying off this debt so that we can buy a house is like the next exciting financial thing we're thinking about. So, yeah.
You know you're talking to money masters when they say the next exciting financial thing we're gonna do is pay off debt. It's pretty awesome to hear those words come out of your mouths. Okay, next question. What's one purchase that your partner has made in the last year that you're still trying to understand? Sarah, why don't you go first this time?
So it's hard for me because I don't know. I feel like Taylen does travel a lot for Spikeball, but I understand that. But the things I don't understand is like trophies, medals, and T-shirts for fucking his Spikeball league. It's like, really? Do we need to waste money on this shit? But I don't know. Part of me understands it, but a part of me is just like, oh, more junk for people to throw away.
Yeah. It's, yeah.
Taylen, do you really enjoy buying trophies? Tell me more about this.
I run a Spikeball league or a round net league here in San Francisco. So I'm buying, I have shirts and I have different things for the league. So it's less of spending money and more of spending the revenue that I've generated.
Whatever.
So it's less money.
But you could have more revenue.
He's just reinvesting it in the business.
What?
You're just reinvesting it back into the business.
That's right. That's right.
Shut up,
It's early stages. You have to spend money to make money.
And Taylen, what was your answer?
I put down a couple of things, and those are one of them is Davis water. So Sarah, we have a water cooler in our apartment, in our kitchen, that has imported water from Davis, California, Sarah's hometown. There's an H2O to go. It's a little water place there that
it's the best water in the world.
Better than Hetch.
Davis water sucks, so you have to find places like H2O to go to get drinking water. And even though we live in San Francisco, which according to the employees at H2O to go is some of the purest water in all of California, fuckers, I still prefer it.
So that's one that,
yeah.
I mean, I drink it, and I definitely take advantage of it, but I also drink tap water just the same.
Just the same.
Do you notice the difference, Taylen? Be honest.
I do not. Sarah does this.
I do.
So
they did a blind taste test on me.
Well, I think the better story is the time that I had come home from, I think it was when I ran a big round net tournament last year, and I had this big jug of water left over. And I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, it takes up too much space for our fridge and just in our house in general. So I was going to pour, our Davis water cooler was getting pretty low. I was like, I'll just pour it in there. And Sarah grabs the glass, takes one sip, is like, oh, did you put trash water in here? Instantly knew. Instantly, she could tell the difference. I honestly can't, but I have pretty trash taste buds, so I'm not the person to ask. I'm sure there is a taste difference. But I bathe everything in hot sauce. So.
What else was on the list?
New bedding so frequently.
Yeah.
That's the one that I always scratch my head at with hers. She does like new bedding pretty frequently. We've gone through a lot in our relationship, and I scratch my head because I had one pair of sheets for the first 7 years of bachelorhood.
Okay, that's excessive.
They were already used.
That's quite the stretch.
So I guess I kind of understand bedding though, because it does feel nice getting into nice sheets.
Cool. Next question. Complete the following sentence. When it comes to money, one thing that we can't agree on is...
What is considered frivolous?
That's true.
All right. So what's something that you consider frivolous that Sarah might not agree with?
Davis water. That's probably the best example. There aren't a ton of examples. They just kind of come up here and there, and kind of on the spot, I can't really think of anything. But that's kind of one. And with the reverse of that, spike ball shirts and trophies and things like that, or even making a trophy for our fantasy football league. I'm sure she considers frivolous.
Yep.
Whereas I see that as community building. So
Mission critical.
Yeah.
How about you, Sarah?
I said investing it. I remember talking to him about that, and I forget what the context was, but we were talking about how much would you be comfortable investing it? And I was like, I don't know, $50. And he was more thinking 500. I don't remember.
I don't remember the number either.
Yeah, but his was significantly more than me. It just, I don't know, it feels like gambling to me, and it makes me really nervous.
And I guess that speaks a little bit to what you were talking about earlier, Sarah, about you just being a little more risk averse than Taylen. Okay, so the second to last question. What money question do you guys think is important to ask your partner when things start to get serious in a relationship?
My answer was, what are your 3 financial goals?
Did you ask Sarah that, Taylen?
I feel like we talked about that pretty early on.
Did we? I don't remember that.
She doesn't remember a lot of things that I say, apparently.
So how would you answer that question, Taylen? What are your 3 financial goals?
My 3 financial goals would be getting out of debt. These are a little more personal, not necessarily bigger. But getting out of debt, saving for a house/family, and then saving for travel. The fourth one on there is obviously retirement and everything, but I think talking a little more immediate. The first kind of goals that we have coming up in our lives.
And Sarah, how would you answer that question? Top 3 financial goals.
I think the first 2 would be the same: getting out of debt, saving for children, family, and I think I would just go straight to saving for end of life and retirement sort of stuff. Because I am not as excited about travel as Taylen is.
Yeah.
Well, your dad would be proud.
He sure would.
And how would you answer that question, Sarah? What money question do you think is important to ask your partner when things start to get serious?
What's your relationship like with money? Do you save it, spend it, balance it? Do you worry about money? Do you not worry about money? Do you have family shit with money? How do you feel about money, and what place does it have in your life?
I love that question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And did you ask Taylen those questions?
I never asked him outright, but I observed. Yeah. No, it was a big issue of contention with my parents, and so it's something that I'm always sort of sniffing out in people.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of our habits are inherited from what we saw our parents go through, or frankly what they did themselves sometimes. So that's so not surprising. Okay, final question. What's your spending number? The number that you guys like to check in with each other on before you spend that amount of money.
I feel bad because, and I haven't wanted to tell him this, because I put down a number and then I realized I did a little room project, and I totally spent more than that and like didn't talk to him because I was feeling wild and crazy. But I said 500 or 1,000. I was sort of between those two numbers.
And I put a number based on the fact that I don't think that there really is a number. I feel like we both kind of have. I feel like we both have trust there with each other that we're working towards the same goals. And so, like, if you spend, so it very much depends on, like, if I'm buying like a lampshade for $20, I'll check in with Sarah because I'm not sure what to do. But if I'm buying a plane ticket to go on a trip, then then it's whatever. I put $100. My first instinct was $250. But that's basically just based on if I'm buying something more like needed for the two of us, and I want to check in and make sure that that's okay. But honestly, there isn't really a number. I feel like.
And I think that answer is really important to our like financial compatibility, because it's the fact that like I feel guilt because that's how I was raised, but the fact that he's like, whatever, it's very important to me.
Yeah, I feel like Sarah will spend money, and if it bothered me, like we'll talk about it. And it kind of goes back to the very beginning. I think it's come up a bit more recently, and it's not necessarily the best time to talk about it, but it's good to talk about it at some point. You have to talk about it, but I feel overall, I know that Sarah has our best interests at heart and has our goals in mind. It's just good to have, maybe those monthly money dates where we sit down and just talk and say, hey, so here's where our goals stand. Are we on track? Oh, it looks like we spent a lot more this month. Why? Where? How can we be better next month? And if we're doing great, then good job. Let's keep this up. So.
That's awesome. Is there a question that we didn't ask you guys that you wish we'd asked you?
Well, maybe a different way of putting it, and then I want to hear what you were about to say, Sarah, is what question would you like us to ask other couples that you would like to hear an answer to?
Agreed, babe. Nice job.
Because my sister is going through a divorce, and as I think about it sometimes.
Divorce?
No, well, yeah. I don't know. I just think like.
Slow down on those medal and trophy purchases, Taylen.
Like shitty question to ask on like when you're talking to a couple, but just have you thought about what might happen if like shit happens and this doesn't work out? Like, have you thought about what your financial future would look like independent of your spouse or your ex-spouse in that case? Because it is something that I think about, and that my sister has talked a lot about like, oh, don't share accounts and don't do this.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting question. I guess part of what I would worry about is, there's the fact of the matter that a lot of people do get divorced in this country. So there's that on the one hand, but on the other, I worry that sort of thinking in that way, even though it might be important to ask those questions, already puts you in sort of a defensive mindset, and so might bring up things that you wouldn't consider otherwise. So things like, you decide not to share an account because you're worried about the eventual outcome, even though it makes practical sense today.
I totally disagree.
Yeah?
I totally disagree. Summer and I have slightly different perspectives on this, but for me, my parents got divorced when I was 10 years old, and I think it's incredibly important to plan for the worst case scenario. And obviously, like, I would never want us to end up in that place, but I prefer knowing that, if that were to ever happen for whatever reason, we at least have a very sort of like well understood understanding between the two of us on how we would handle things and what would happen and how it would all play out. And I totally understand when people say, well, I don't like to think about that because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. But honestly, when you don't have that and you're going through it, it's a really ugly process.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was something that actually when Sarah and I were engaged, I had brought up just the idea of like a prenuptial, and Delmar, I think I even asked you, maybe even Oddity, and I think it was Oddity that said you can do postnuptial, you can do other things, but Sarah and I discussed, and quickly like abandoned that idea. And I think Sarah's reasoning was that it puts it in your mind or kind of sets you up for failure, kind of what you were talking about there, Delmar. It's kind of the attitude that you have about it. Because I was coming from it more from Oddity's perspective of, I don't think we're going to get divorced. I'm not planning on getting divorced. Like I'm madly in love with you, but people change and things change, circumstances change. Do we want to look out for that? But Sarah had a different viewpoint on it.
What I think changed things for me, because Taylen, this, Oddity and I did end up getting a prenup, is sort of her experience with all of this is, she took the attitude and the view that, I don't want things to end up there, but I know that if they do, and there's some chance that they might, that we're not going to be in the best headspace. And so while we have an abundance of sort of love and affection and care for each other, let's think about this clear-headedly. And so that's sort of the spirit in which I went into this, is it's a fail-safe of some sort.
Yeah, I think the only thing I just didn't want was for it to be any kind of like retaliatory, and I don't even know if that's a word, but basically just didn't want it to be a contentious, thing that was thrown around, because I think money and kids are the two things that always get tangled up in a divorce, and that was something that
and dogs.
I consider Goose our kids. So, but and I remember when we got Goose too. Like Dummer and I were dating, and I like sat him down and I had a serious conversation with him, and I was like, "Hey, babe, one of the discussions we need to have is if we were to break up, who gets the dog?" And he was so clever about it, because he freaking just says to me, he's like, "Oh, I feel like that's a very easy answer." And I was thinking, oh great, he's going to say, "You know how to handle dogs, you get to keep the dog." And he was like, "I know you would just never take my first dog away from me." And I was like, dang. Damn. And I'm like, right, exactly.
Well played.
It was the most manipulative shit he's played on me in our relationship.
Yeah, that was a low point.
But yeah. So to avoid situations like that,
yeah.
Thank you guys for spending the time with us, talking to us about your own experiences, and frankly, just being so frank and honest about how you guys have hacked and navigated all of these money conversations. There's one final question I'd love to ask you guys before we close this out and wrap this up. And Sarah, why don't you tell me what one of Taylen's best money habits is or are?
He's very aware of what's coming in and what's going out. And I think it's a great habit that like is one of those things I aspire to, and I don't do. I probably should, but yeah.
And Taylen, what about you for Sarah?
For Sarah,
you were like, for me, I can list a couple more.
No, she kind of lets me be a little crazy. Like I can get overzealous sometimes and gung ho about money things, and she lets me get away with it, and is open to having conversations about it, and does have like our future at heart with what she does, and so I think that's one of her best things. It's not necessarily a habit; it's just how she is.
You bring up a really interesting point there. A lot of people tend to think about money habits and sort of good behavior, these sorts of topics, in terms of techniques or tools that they use. So a cool gadget that they found, a cool app that they found, a cool technique that they try, or a hack that they have. But you put your finger on it. One of the things that one of my sort of financial heroes, Buffett, and another one, Munger, talk about a lot is it has nothing to do with sort of techniques that they use, but a lot of it is just personality and having sort of the patience and ability to discern when to let something be. And so it sounds like you're sort of speaking in that sphere. It's not so much a technique or hack that Sarah employs, but sort of a personality or a disposition that she has that that allows the two of you to do well as a couple when it comes to your finances?
So I think about money more, and I kind of have, you know, the spreadsheets and the apps and the different things that I use. But even though I'm the more money conscious person, Sarah has control of our joint savings account, and that's kind of in her. So it's just kind of this nice kind of counterbalance that we have between us. It just kind of sets up nicely.
Very cool. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us. I had a blast. I know that I've learned a few things about you, Taylen, and the two of you as a couple. One of the things I enjoy very much about these conversations is looking into how other people are managing their finances, how they're talking about some of the things that Aditi and I talk about on a daily or weekly basis. So thank you for sharing your time with us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, great.
The Money Date podcast is an initiative of Zeta, a company that I launched to help couples track and manage their finances together. If you're inspired by what you heard on this show, you can learn more at zetahelp.com.